Now, back on the AM show, you can see in the background, we have that because up next, we're going to be telling you about what is happening in some of our basic schools. In fact, it's the second season of Ghana's Schools of Shame. And today, we'll be taking you all the way to Bimbela, where there is an inadequacy of furniture in our schools. That conversation will be spearheaded by Bernice Abubeidu Lanza, and it is up next on the AM show.
Children slumming on the bare, dirty floor in the name of education is common in many rural communities across the country. The pupils improvise by squatting, lying on their bellies or assuming weird positions on the floor just to get an education. The Bakwaba Primary School in the Nanumba North District of the Northern Region is one of the schools with a furniture problem. About 6 classes sit on the bare floor to study. For many years, the nursery, kindergarten, all the way to primary 5 do not have furniture. The problem is bigger in the Northern Region. About 213,252 children are without furniture, and that is according to the Africa Education Watch. Children show up to school in clean uniforms but get dirty in less than 30 minutes upon arrival. Odanjo Gifty is a primary 5 pupil. To get access to a desk, she comes to school very early in the morning. The furniture situation here is based on a first-come, first-served basis, but she is not happy losing hours of sleep because of furniture. Gifty found a way to avoid lying on the floor to write, but she's not happy that her colleagues lie on their bellies to write.
Government blood up gonna tite. The gun can enter Debayadan school cacatang. Ali lack of one young kanga, Ipum Bimena, never couldn't do the Rochina. Bocam with cacatang. Uniform back by uniform, but the gun can enter.
At this point, tears cloud her eyes, and shortly after, all emotion she had bottled up finally let loose.
Ali Mabakasalakana, marked by uniform, my uniform Bakaka. Unkakatonka, what I do to Kokamo coats on in Ali to like being cooked, what I batter. She
had endured enough of the humiliation. Her teacher, Janet Tijotap, who served as my translator, could not believe that the children are so affected by the furniture situation. She also shed tears.
During the rainy season, whenever it rains, it links from the up there. So they have to run into a small room over there. So she coming to school to see her colleagues lying down. When she look at it, she feels sad. So and that was what made her cry. I feel bad.
These tears are because of the pain of inequalities they had suffered for years. For years, teachers have not explored how children feel about sitting, lying and squatting on the bare, dirty floor to study. Many, including teachers, assume that the children are used to slamming it hard on the floor. But times have changed. The children are demanding equality.
Sir, it's very pathetic. The educational minister should try his possible means and talk to Akufo-Addo to solve this problem, because, like I said, she has been seeing her colleagues on TV, how they dress, how their classrooms look, but theirs is different. It's not even quarter to the others.
In 2021, data from the Ministry of Education indicates that about 956,000 KG pupils, representing half of the national KG population, and 1.28 million pupils in primary schools lack desks in schools. Community members of Bakwaba say they have been supporting their children the best way they can. An NGO in education, School for Life, brought them together to ponder over the affairs of the school, to implement a project called Citizen-Led Educational Accountability Responsiveness, which aims at getting the community to hold the government accountable. Parents and some community members divided themselves into two groups, debating ways of supporting the school and also ways of holding the government accountable.
Look at it. Look at the class. Class I made some classes empty. So how does a teacher divide him or herself to teach two classes? It can't happen.
But back in the classroom, a teacher, Mohammed Andratu, is having a hard time teaching her pupils how to write the number 4. The children have no exercise books or pencils, so they're called to write on the chalkboard. Andratu says it is indeed exhausting teaching children without basic learning materials.
It's not easy. Our major challenge is just furniture. Some of them are lying down. The time you realize, some of them will be sleeping. Sometimes you'll be teaching. You see other people, other students playing football outside because there are no furniture in the class. So the space is just like that. So we find it difficult to control them. Sometimes they will be playing. When they are playing, you can't control them. And others, they will be mingling around. Lack of furniture, that is causing that. And again, as a classroom teacher, you are supposed to have your table and chair. But here, not even chair, not talk of table. You can't sit. If you are tired, you can't sit. You can't mark your register. Where to put the register and mark? Sometimes I have to put it on top of the name, mentioning their names, marking the register.
At a nearby school, Jonah Yeli DA Primary School, the headmaster is not happy with the state of the school. Inadequate classrooms, inadequate teachers, the list is endless. The lack of furniture has kept many children at home. They prefer going to the farms or staying at home. Pupils in Primary 2 are trying to identify the alphabet, but it is a disaster.
A, B, C, D, E, F, U, H, I, J, A, F.
This is the effect of not having enough teachers. The director of School for Life, Widat Saibu, is not happy with the situation.
It makes me sad, very sad, because when I go to the communities and look at children really struggling to just acquire basic education. In the northern region, most pupils have only 35% of the trained teachers they need. About 30% do not have schools nearby. A lot of injustice, because a child born to a household that is poor means that his or her fate is sealed. And government, the essence of government is to ensure that these children, regardless of where you are born, you have the basic services, or you have access to basic services required to acquire decent education.
There are about 2.3 million children in Ghana's public basic schools who lack furniture. The Ministry of Education in February promised to send 40,000 desks to schools without desks, although the figure is just a drop in the ocean considering the number of children without furniture. Joy News checks also show that not all the desks have been sent to the communities that needed them.
Really, really emotional scenes there. And I don't know what you felt when that little girl started shedding tears. It really, really got to me. And you could tell the whole mood, her teacher reacting and realizing that this she didn't really think this affected her so badly. It tells you how spontaneous the whole thing was. And it tells you that these children know that they deserve more. They know that they are not being treated fairly. You had one of them saying that they see on television what their colleagues elsewhere, benefit from the government in terms of education. And so it's a really sad scene. But this morning, once again, we're here to find solutions, to explore the angles on how a lasting solution can be brought to this problem. Remember when we did that earlier season, when we had the minister speak during a program and mentioned that he had seen it and he was ashamed, there was some reaction. We were told by government or by the ministry that there was a grand plan, a scheme to ensure that underserved or underprivileged children receive their share of what the education ministry is providing to all Ghanaian children in terms of education. As of yet, we haven't received any response to this particular story, but we hope that we will. But this morning, I've been joined once again by Dr. Peter Anti for him to share his thoughts on this for us. We also have Divine Pe, who is Senior Programs Officer, Africa Education Watch, and we'll be having that conversation shortly. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you, Bernice.
All right, that's Divine, right?
Yeah.
Right, Divine, how are you doing? How did you feel about what you just saw?
Well, I'm fine, but I feel sad about what I've just seen. It's quite common to see this across the country, but especially when you see the children crying, that's more saddening. So it's common, but to see the children appreciating the fact that they actually they have a right to decent education, it's a manifestation that we need to do something urgently on this issue.
Dr. Peter Anti, the last time we spoke concerning Ghana's education sector, we touched on the issue of decentralization. Once again, I'm raising that because in our earlier stories, we realized that possibly could have been a problem that was not highlighted. Why are these children not having desks? Why don't they have proper structures to study with? What is the local assembly doing there? Why must it always be waiting for the ministry to intervene in such matters?
Yeah, thank you very much, and good morning to your viewers. Yes, this particular school is in the Nanumba North District, and it's not alone in terms of the extent of deprivation in the provision of educational resources that we are witnessing. If you look at the data from the Ministry of Education, none of the parameters, they do not meet any of them in terms of student to textbook ratio, in terms of student to desk ratio, student to sitting ratio, everything they don't meet. And sometimes it is zero. It means that they are not available. And these data is backed by the video that you have shown. And that brings back the conversation, as you said, about the role of the district assemblies in the provision of some of these resources. I think that they normally do not do some of these things because they are financially not, they don't have the needed finance to carry on some of these things. And that is why the other time I was talking about a need to revisit our discussion on the decentralization of education in Ghana. For me, I think that we might not need a full decentralization policy. We need a partial one so that there will be some sort of moderation in the way that education provision is carried out in the various districts. But by all means, we need the district to have some sort of financial muscle to be able to address some of these issues firsthand before the problem is escalated to the higher offices. This needs to be done. They can set aside some sort of revenue or income, generate some kind of income, and address some of these basic basic needs that these kids need in terms of provision of desks, provision of 1 or 2 textbooks, provision of fixing of infrastructure, and all those things. I think that if we are able to organize the district assembly in a more forceful way in terms of policy direction, they should be able to do some of these things. And I reiterate the point that we need some sort of partial decentralization in the provision of educational resources in some of these districts. And the data from the ministry is clear. You look at it and you wouldn't be surprised. Some of the pictures that we are seeing on TV can join us.
So this is it. The ministry accepts and appreciates that many Ghanaian children in rural communities do not have chairs to sit on. They don't have textbooks. They are literally stranded when it comes to education. Some of them study under trees. That the ministry knows. But the question is, does the ministry appreciate the urgency of the matter? Does the ministry see this as a priority in terms of the other issues that affect the education sector that also need to be addressed? I think that's the question here, right? Do you get a sense, Dr. Anti, that this is a matter of priority for the education ministry?
Well, for me, I don't think it's a matter of priority. You see, let me put this discussion in some context. If you go to the Ministry of Education, if you go to Ghana Education Service, they have what they call quality variables. The quality variables are variables that they think that if those variables are given the needed kind of attention, they lead to quality education, provision of quality education. So in terms of the quality variables, they have what they call inputs, and then they have what we call the output variables or outcome variables. And then we have the input variables. The Ministry of Education have certain input variables that they look for. Look at their data set. You see that they capture these input variables. What are these input variables? They look at teacher to student ratio. They look at student to desk ratio, student to table ratio. They look at student to textbook ratio. The textbook, they have all the core textbooks. They look at the nature of school building. They look at quality of teachers. So they look at number of trained teachers and the number of untrained teachers. So these variables, these things I mentioned, are things that the ministry thinks that if these things are put in the proper perspective, if they are provided, the students are enjoying quality education. Then, of course, we look at the transmission of these input variables into outcomes or outputs, which would be the performance that the students are exhibiting right after school, showing numeracy skills and literacy skills, and then whatever happens after they have left school. But if the ministry thinks that these are variables that are important, their focus would first and foremost would be the provision of these things that they have already captured as variables that provide quality education. And that is why I'm saying that I don't think they believe that provision of these things will lead to the provision of quality education, because their data shows that most of these schools, the districts in question, they do not have the needed input variables that mean that they are being given quality education. And if they have not done anything about it since time immemorial, and maybe we're not limiting it into maybe a particular government or whatever it is, it's been there for a considerable period of time. So if they have not been able to do anything about it, then it means that it is not a priority. I wish that the ministry, by maybe when you enter the ministry as a Minister of Education, you have access to this data. And then we measure your performance based on the number of schools that you've been able to transform in terms of these variables, where they were and where they are now. If you are able to do that, then that means that this is your priority. But as it stands now, I don't think that is the priority of the ministry to ensure that these schools that are deprived in terms of the resources that they need to be able to access quality education, they don't have any plans to give them the needed resources.
Let me find out from you, Divine. You have done a lot of work in this sector. You are on the ground, in touch with what's happening. What is your appreciation of the true cause of this? Because in our earlier conversations, some had suggested that probably because these children come from deprived areas and deprived communities, there's some form of neglect. But others also suggested that it is possible that their plight may have not come to the attention of the Education Ministry as a whole. But we know that the statistics are there, the information is there, the ministry has it. So what do you think, or what do you believe is the reason why these children are still, you know, in the situation that they find themselves?
Yeah, Benny, it's right that the ministry is aware, because whatever data we are using is right from the ministry's own MS data. So awareness at the policy level, that is so high, it is already existing. The challenge is about the resources to address that. I agree with those that are saying that we haven't prioritized the education of those in underserved communities. Because if you look at it, the way we finance education, we do not adopt the equity approach. In Ghana, we spend 3 times more on 20% of children from the high-income household compared to those from poorest high-income household. So there's a lack of equity in adoption of our education financing. Once you adopt the wholesale approach, you are going to disadvantage this kind of children. So there's a need for us to get back to the drawing board and look at how we can adopt equity-based approach in our education financing. So the equity-based approach, it can take different forms. It can be gender equity, but this specifically, we are talking about the poverty dimension, so that you look at those that are in underserved communities, and you can have dedicated education financing policy to address the peculiar needs that they have. But if you lump all of them together and want to address the issue, you are again going to channel more money to those that already have. So that's a very important point to make, that we need to adopt equity-based in our education financing. Not until that, we will continue to think that we are putting in money into education. But at the end of the day, it is adding value to some children more than those that actually need the money. But again, we also have to appreciate that the way we finance basic education and secondary school education, especially when it comes to infrastructure development, is also the reason why we are here. If you...
Hello, Divine.
It's a dedicated source of fund for improving infrastructure in the country. If you compare how it is spent between basic and the secondary school, you will realize that
well, I was hoping to... Okay, right.
Just for instance, in 2014, capital expenditure, which is the budget line for improving infrastructure.
I was hoping we could have Divine. Hello, Divine. Sorry, we're losing you. Your line keeps freezing. I hope you can make your point quickly so that we don't lose you again. And we did. We'll try to get Divine's line properly established, and he could conclude his thoughts there with us. I'm told he's back. Sorry, Divine. I was just asking you to try and conclude briefly so that we don't lose you again. All right. Sorry about that. I'm extremely sorry about that. But let me go to Dr. Dr. Peter Anti. Forgive me. Stephen keeps coming to my mind, a former colleague. Dr. Peter Anti, this is where we are, 2023, in Ghana, considered a very, dynamic, considered the beacon of democracy development when it comes to this part of the world. And we are still struggling with something as basic as this, providing furniture and good spaces for children to study and learn in. What for you will be that one thing we can do to deal with this strategically? And how soon do you think we can do this, considering you believe is a priority and must be a priority for the Education Ministry? If the ministry believes it can solve this, how long do you think it will take us?
Well, I think that we have to go back to the basics. The first thing is to look at the infrastructure mapping. I'm aware that the ministry, I think since last year, have been doing sort of infrastructure mapping of schools in Ghana. So I believe that the first thing is to get the data right. So let's organize the data, group the schools into deprived, not deprived, maybe semi-deprived. Then after that one, we need to now have dedicated source of funding to ensure that those schools that are classified as deprived are given the needed kind of assistance that they want. And I think this can be done within the shortest possible time because the ministry has this data available to them. All that they need to do is to do their mapping and then classify or categorize the schools into deprived and non-deprived or semi-deprived or whatever category that they would want to develop. When they finish with that, then they zoom into the deprived. The deprived will mean that they do not have the requisite input variables that the school needs to be able to deliver quality education. Again, I feel that we also need to redefine what we mean by infrastructure. I think if you look at the literature, the definition of infrastructure goes beyond the provision of a building that students study in. It includes, like the report from Hiawa the other time, it includes even the place of convenience. And if you look at this school, I wonder even if they have any place of convenience, potable water to drink and all those things. We have to do all these things in a more holistic manner to be able to address this challenge. I also think that the ministry might not have all the resources. And that is why when you do this kind of mapping, you make it available to CSOs, philanthropists, any other agency, organization, both donor agencies that come into the country to support education, so that you know that when they are entering the country, there is a list of schools that need certain kinds of assistance that they can really go and visit. More times, what we see is that some of these agencies come into the country and then they are taken to the schools in Accra and then the schools nearby, whereas there are remote Ghana that needs these kinds of assistance. So when you have this kind of data available, you now assist those who are coming to donate to schools in Ghana to go to some of these schools. If you think that you don't have the needed infrastructure, the needed financial capability to solve all these problems, then you create that enabling environment to ensure that the resources that are coming into the sector from other areas are tilted or are pushed towards some of these schools that need urgent attention. And I think if we start doing it this way, we'll be able to address some of these issues one after the other. But also the need for local initiative is important, because you cannot say you are the district chief executive officer of Nanumba North and be proud of what we are seeing on TV. You cannot say that you are the MP in that district and be proud of what you see on TV. You cannot say that you are the chief of this district. You cannot say that you are a professor in a university and you come from this district and be proud of some of these things. The local leadership needs to come up strongly. They need to mobilize and ensure that the little things that they can do to provide some sort of education to their local people, they are able to do so. So this is something that all hands should be brought on board. Everybody who has the financial muscle, the big men in the country that do a lot of donation, they sponsor other people to do other things, the institutions, organizations that like MTN, like Vodafone, all those big institutions, they have to go to the Ministry of Education, get these kinds of data, and then adopt some of these deprived basic schools and assist them to get the needed resources that they
Dr. Anti, so how about the ministry being proactive and going to these organizations and selling the problem to them and asking them if they could use that as their CSR instead?
Exactly. That is great, and I think that through this discussion, the ministry would have to take some of these things up. Of course, they have the data, as I said, they have the infrastructure and maps available. They should be able to now develop proposals, because we know when you talk about the funding, they will tell you that the money is not there. So now we want to move beyond that and say that, okay, now get us the data, develop a proposal like we all do, and then walk into some of these institutions, provide them with do a presentation with them, let them know the state of some of these basic schools, so that they will now channel their resources, the CSR that they do, to some of these basic schools. And I think it will be able to help. And I have to, at this point, commend Joy News for forceful advocacy in that regard, in this regard, because if you don't bring some of these things up, as I said the other time, some of us, I mean, most people who are not in the sector will not have any idea, and will continue to fold our arms and think that we are providing education to everybody in this country. But unfortunately, that is not what we are doing. Some of them are not experiencing education. We are just doing something to make sure that they get some sort of reading and whatever it is. Abilities, but we are not giving them education, and that shouldn't be the case in Ghana in 2023.
I appreciate your time this morning. Dr. Peter Anti is Executive Director of IFES, the Institute for Education, and we've been talking about this rather sad situation. My colleague Jojo Kobna brought us from a school in the Nanumba North District, where you could see a child just breaking down about their situation of not having any chairs, not having uniforms. And so we are appealing to those responsible to do their work and ensure that these children get what they deserve. They say they see what their other colleagues in other parts of the country have, and they feel they aren't being treated fairly. So please, let us do our work. So that was Dr. Peter Anti, who is the Executive Director of the Institute for Education Studies. Earlier we had Divine Kbe, Senior Programs Officer, Africa Education Watch. Unfortunately, technology couldn't allow us to conclude with him, but hopefully this conversation will definitely progress. I hope we can get the Education Ministry or the GES to respond to some of the issues that have been raised. You're watching the AM show. We'll take a quick breather now. When we come back, we've got something exciting to share with you. Do stay.